There's no doubt that this part of the state of Colorado is the most polluted community in the state. But we're pretty surprised, I guess, to be on one of the top lists for the country.
The big problem with the 80216 zip code is that you have a high level of pollutants with also a high population density. Globeville and Elyria are remarkable in just the amount of toxins that basically became their legacy.
We have land pollution, we have air pollution, and we have water pollution. We have to recognize how they're all connected, what impacts they have on a human's body, a human's emotions.
There's been environmental injustice for the last 100 years, and these neighborhoods have been neglected. And the people who reside in these type of neighborhoods, your lifespan is decreased by 10 years.
You can see right here, our playgrounds, our schools are all near all of this industry.
I want to stay here and continue fighting for my community and what we deserve, because if I don't, who else will? I'm really excited now to have a little baby that's gonna be able to play back here. It's the kind of thing that makes you fight for the neighborhood. I am Candy Cedevaca. We are currently in the Swansea neighborhood of Denver, which is my home neighborhood, and we are at my house, which was my great-grandmother's house and where I grew up. These are a couple of good ones. That's my great-grandma and great-grandpa. And this is literally in front of the house. This house was built in the 40s. Nobody else has lived in this house but our family. And I've been here on this corner since I was 4 years old. This is a very spiritual place. And I keep coming back to this space no matter where I go in the world. I've had the privilege of traveling the world and deciding consciously where I want to live, where I want to be, and I always come back here. I just feel like there's something here that can't be replaced, and it's the people. It's that sense of shared origin, shared responsibility, just a connection that you don't get in a lot of neighborhoods anymore.
There's a lot of people here that, have grown up here and they know each other, and there's still a sense of community, of neighborhood. I'm a fourth generation North Denver resident, and I've lived here basically my whole life. My great-grandmother lived right down the street here. This is where my parents met, so my roots are real deep here in this part of Denver.
I've been here since 1963. My parents migrated from Los Angeles because of the working environment that was here. A lot of blue-collar jobs, well-paying jobs, and that's what attracted my father to come to this part of the city. It's also known as 80216, which is the most contaminated neighborhood in America. And the composition of 80216 is 3 neighborhoods: Globeville, Elyria, and Swansea.
Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, and even Cole are all along this borderlands of Denver to Adams County and Commerce City. It's a beautiful community, predominantly Hispanic community. And so this whole conversation around environmental justice is a lot around the frontera, the borderlands of where communities blend in with industry, where communities blend with each other, where Denver blends with Commerce City.
Globeville, Elyria, Swansea were towns that emerged around the smelters that were down here. They were worker towns, and they were very organized worker towns. And to this day, it's like that. All of your people who've built the city in a range of different ways live in these communities. And on one block, I can find someone who does HVAC, plumbing, landscaping, snow removal, just on one block, on this block. And so that's kind of the trend throughout the neighborhood.
I think the history of North Denver is quite complex and very important for understanding Denver in particular.
Once the railroads were built around the early 1870s, that's when a lot of the smelters that had been up in the mountains in the mining districts decided to relocate near the railroad in the Globeville and Elyria areas. So immediately you saw the Holden smelter, the Globe smelter, one after another being constructed there. Let's see. My name is Alex Hernandez. I'm a special collections librarian with Denver Public Library in our Western History Department.
Monaco, Quebec, Broadway.
One of our goals is to kind of document the history of Denver and neighborhoods like Globeville that often get overlooked. So this is an 1889 bird's eye view of Denver, and up in the northern part along the Platte River, you can just see a contiguous line of smokestacks. So initially, Globeville was named Holden, and that was named after an early smelter. It was the Holden smelter. But then when the Globe smelter was established, they named it Globeville. So it's not a good sign when your community is named after the smelter that will continue to pollute you for the next 107 years.
Back then, the smeltering plant was fully operational at that point in time, and the smokestack would go up, and then you'd see all the cadmium, lead, arsenic just inundate the neighborhoods, and it would just proliferate.
Even in central Denver, before we were dealing with smog, the big issue was actually black smoke. So I can't even imagine what it would have been like living nearby to multiple smelters, because they were just constantly letting gases into the air.
I mean, even when you look at our city seal, there's a smokestack in the background, and that smokestack is a Globeville smelter smokestack.
So it's been a legacy of the history of Denver as it's grown with the railroads, the manifest destiny, and everything that goes along with it, good and bad, the growth of Denver. And so it became a community of immigrants who lived and worked in the community.
As soon as the gold rush started and people started buying up buildings, housing costs were through the roof in Denver, even at that early time. So a lot of these immigrant groups were relocating to Globeville, which the northwest of it was filled with swampland. So it wasn't the most desirable land, but it was good for smelters and people seeking jobs.
As they started setting up zoning codes, this area became industrial zoning, and so you started to see more and more industry being placed in one community, and yet you still have housing here, and that's really the tension that exists of people living next to this.
As a result of it being the industrial hub of Denver, lots of industrial facilities started being located there. But residents were also located there because they were part of the workforce for these industries. And so mixing with industry and residential communities is not always great for the health of the communities.
The reason they picked that area was predominantly because the railroads were established there in the early 1870s, so that made it very attractive to industry, which is why in addition to the smelters, you got animal rendering plants, you got slaughterhouses, stockyards.
Over time, you know, the soil contamination, pollution in the area, it wasn't an appetizing area for people to say, I want to live there. And so I think that over time it became ignored by the government, by companies that just wanted profit over benefit of the people that actually lived there.
I think Globeville was just sort of a no man's land that the rest of the city, it was kind of out of sight, out of mind.
So that's the train interchange here. So we're on each side of this giant industrial area. You can see right here, you know, our playgrounds, our schools are all near all of this industry. I mean, countless pipelines and tanks that we don't know what's in them.
We are at the nexus of all transportation systems in the region, with freight 1 block away, with the highway 3 blocks away. Like, all of those things are so important and critical to our region, yet we've been virtually absent from decision making for the entire time we've been a part of the city of Denver.
So we try to maintain, among other things, clipping files for all the neighborhoods around Denver. You really get a good overview of all the things that we're facing in a community over a century. Globeville has always been isolated from Denver. In 1958, we saw the Valley Highway project, what we consider I-25, and that cut right through the community. And then in 1964, we saw the I-70 completion, which bisected it even further. And one of the worst parts of the highway projects was that it actually cut off the southern part of Globeville, which had more community centers and activities for kids to participate in.
We have some heavy truck traffic here. We've got traffic on the interstate. It's the kind of noise and disruption and pollution that you don't usually associate with a beautiful park environment. When I-70 was originally constructed in 1964, it was during an era of massive interstate construction across the country. And those interstates, when they went through the cities, went through cities that tended to be populated by people of color. They were low-income communities, people without the political power to say no. I mean, it's no coincidence the freeway is located where it is today.
A lot of the carving up of neighborhoods using interstates was related to further marginalizing those groups and making sure they continued to live in poverty, because that also guarantees a very cheap labor force that is not going to fight back against those injustices.
I think our community has been organizing over the last decade to strengthen their voice around the issues of displacement, around the issues of transportation inequity, pollution. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. I think we're at a pivotal place for our community.
Okay, cool. Let's pick this. Okay, awesome. Okay, there. My name is Anna Varela. We are in my home here in Elyria. I work for the GES Coalition. GES stands for Globeville, Elyria, Swansea Neighborhoods. Good boy, sit. My home is an 1895 Victorian cottage. This area was developed during the Slavic and Eastern European migration to the area. They were working on the rail in the area and other different industries in Denver. It is still an immigrant community, although now it's Hispanic, and I was actually really excited about that because I myself am Hispanic. Of course, everything in my house is vintage, so we're gonna do this with a vintage percolator. Now, originally I wanted a 1960s home, and I came out with a 1959 kitchen, and I'm really proud of that. I had no idea I was moving into the most polluted zip code in America. The contaminants in the air from that really do a toll on people's mental health and their ability to open windows and just enjoy their outdoor space. We, of course, are surrounded by the freeways. The I-70 freeway is horizontal to us, and then we have I-25. And so we have constant cars, and recently with the expansion of the I-70, if you're ever in just total silence, you can always hear the cars.
So you can just hear how loud the industry is around here. I think that's trains, trucks, all day long. It's noise pollution. We believe that taking on the air pollution through the transportation sector will have huge impacts for the community here. My name is Ian Thomas Tafoya, born and raised here in North Denver, and I'm an environmental justice activist who turned into a career. I really became aware of the environmental injustice in North Denver through my work at the city. I worked for Denver City Council, and I started to hear about the I-70 widening and what that meant for my community. And so I got involved in a fight to push back.
In 2015, we were approached by a number of community members and community organizations here in Swansea, Elyria, and Globeville because they were concerned about CDOT's proposal to widen I-70 from about 85 feet to almost 300 feet. They were worried about the effect of increased traffic with the pollution that comes with that. I'm Heidi McIntosh. I'm the managing attorney of Earth Justice. Earth Justice is a national nonprofit environmental law firm. We use the power of the law to ensure that everybody has the right to a clean and healthy environment. This neighborhood already has higher than average incidences of all kinds of diseases that are related to pollution exposure. Bottom line is that the people in these communities are entitled to a healthy and clean environment. That's what they deserve, that's what the law requires, and that's what we hope to support them in doing as they try to achieve those goals.
When we were suing on the highway and you take on the state, it's very expensive. We started to run out of money. I think we raised $150,000 from the community itself. And I went to Washington, D.C. and I asked Earth Justice National, hey, will you help us take on this case? And since then, I've had a very strong partnership with Earth Justice. They represent us on maybe a dozen different issues.
None of this project could have happened if Denver hadn't agreed to give 46th Avenue to CDOT. That was the first line of defense that could have been activated for our community.
46th Street was a boulevard where the community came together to shop and get their hair done and to socialize at restaurants. This was really the core of the community at the time. And so when I-70 was originally constructed in 1964, it obviously had a tremendous disproportionate impact on the communities here.
But because we had no representation that actually cared about the experiences in this community, we missed that opportunity pretty early on.
And so when we saw this being repeated just 50 years later, we were like, we have to stand up.
There were a multitude of places thereafter where the city could have demanded more, required more, that could have stopped the expansion.
They also deferred to CDOT's opinion that widening the freeway with all of its impacts was actually going to be better for the community because freeway traffic would be moving more quickly instead of being stuck in traffic jams in the way it had been. Now, I've been in a traffic jam on I-70 right through here, and history tells you that you really can't build your way out of traffic congestion. If you build it, they will come.
So the C-70 project to expand the interstate, I know it was billed as a way to kind of mitigate previous impacts by putting some of the highway underneath. But I think a lot of the community activists were upset by the process that construction entailed.
We still always talk about the layer of dust that we had on everything during the expansion. So it's just more and more pollutants from construction in the area.
We try to stop that. Take it around the city, take it outside the city. Let us connect our neighborhood, let us re-engage.
What they envisioned for their neighborhood was kind of a return to what it was originally before the interstate went in 1964. And so one of the visions was to get rid of the freeway entirely and reroute the freeway traffic along I-270 where there are fewer communities. It's mostly industrial. If they couldn't do that, the other vision was to put the interstate in a tunnel that would have avoided the impacts entirely.
On I-70, First, we filed the Title VI complaint, and Title VI is a part of the Civil Rights Act, and we were saying that there was, racially motivated prejudice in the development of this project. We weren't granted that by the federal government. And then we sued over the National Environmental Policy Act, which has to do with projects and understanding what the impacts are. We went all the way to the court on that. We lost on that.
They held that things like this deck were enough to mitigate the impacts to the community, even though it was not what the community itself would have wanted.
And then we sued under the Clean Air Act,
arguing that the increased traffic was going to result in exceedances of the air quality standards.
The Clean Air Act lawsuit, ultimately we settled. It was a really hard decision. I remember crying about it for a whole day. We won some concessions from the state and from the Federal Highway Administration to upgrade windows in the community, take on issues around noise, money to plant trees, and then to study cumulative impact.
The park was kind of arbitrarily thrown in there, and a lot of people in the neighborhood called it lipstick on a pig.
And it was supposedly an amenity for the community to have this park. It serves as the playground for the youth during the day and community space the rest of the time like any other park. And it rides on top of the highway, as I was telling you.
When the freeway was expanded, it gobbled up Swansea Elementary's existing playground. So they had to move the playground, and then they gave the elementary school access to the deck here.
We shouldn't have, educational facilities, libraries, rec centers, these places where people go to grow and to learn, right next to toxic pollution.
Putting a park on top of a highway in the most polluted zip code in America feels a little offensive.
My thoughts on the park over the freeway are that is a perfect example of when community isn't really heard. The neighbors wanted green space, not AstroTurf. The neighbors wanted access to active areas, not a locked gate.
What we have here is, a nice grassy area. There's a soccer field there, which is closed. It's not available to the public other than through a permit. At either end, you've got freeway exhaust coming out, which is one of the concerns.
It's conveniently just feet short of requiring stacks to push the air pollution higher into the air.
We have over 400,000 cars that pass, and we're boxed into 2 highways, major interstates, that service the whole United States. Those cars are producing carbon. And then we got the runoff. When it rains and it comes off those highways, the benzene. They found benzene inside the school where kids breathe. Benzene is the worst product. They use benzene to clean auto engines. So the air quality, it all comes back down to the air quality again.
The way to put it is that these communities are being overly burdened by the freeway. They are bearing the cost of everybody else's transportation needs. So what the community members here believed, which I think is accurate, is that the freeway is not here for the convenience of the neighborhood. It's here for the convenience of everybody else.
The biggest cause of air pollution from my experience with my research in Denver is the traffic. We have traffic-related air pollution levels that increasingly affect your health as you move closer to the roadway.
Right next to the highways, you see significantly higher concentrations of toxins like sulfur dioxide. And so, particularly children in these communities, you often see around the country communities like this, growing up with different developmental disabilities. They might have higher rates of asthma, things like that.
Ay, ¿cómo se llama? Ellos están más expuestos a todo lo que, digamos, diariamente, mañana, tarde, noche, porque ellos tienen que salir afuera. Y igual, pues están en esta misma área, llegan a su casa y es lo mismo, no hay otra opción o otra elección de ellos como niños.
It is something that I'm gonna always be hyper conscious of and hyper vigilant about with my kids. But, you know, on my block, like, I do everything I can to help my neighborhood remain stable, because those community ties and having my kid grow up on a block that feels like family in a world like the world we're living in is super important to me.
Air pollution is something you don't often see. You can see the Denver brown cloud, but that's a different kind of experience than everyday particulate air pollution. I'm Professor Shelley Miller. I am a faculty member at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'm one of the principal investigators of this project, Social Justice and Environmental Quality in Denver.
I was really happy to be a participant with the SJEQ AtmoTube study. It was with CU Boulder, and I worked really closely with their researchers to understand the contaminants in my area. So this is the AtmoTube. Mine is well-loved condition. They try to give us the same AtmoTube that we've been using throughout the study.
The goal of the project is to understand the environmental impacts and social impacts and well-being impacts on the North Denver communities that have been significantly impacted by all the construction going on around the C70 project and other development projects in that region. So we have a multi-pronged approach, and that has enabled us to really understand what the community members care about and what they need more support around. We also then have a technical team, which is based on computer science approaches, and then an environmental team, which is based on air quality science. And the community members get this air pollution monitor that they carry with them every day for a month. And what the air pollution monitor does is measure the air quality that they're experiencing.
And what would happen is I would wear this either as a keychain, on my backpack, on my person. And what's awesome about this is it was always monitoring the humidity, the temperature, and also the PM1 levels. Those are typically levels of toxins in the area, whether that's dirt or skin cells or just general kind of fuzz in the air. So that was really helpful to have this to kind of gauge and look back on day by day.
We have analyzed the data that we have collected, and we have actually found some very interesting results from there. We saw essentially a direct correlation between the happiness level of the people and their distance from site of the construction. The poorer the air quality or the noise pollution is, less happy the people were.
So one of the unique aspects of this study was that we decided to provide the citizens with immediate mitigation strategies. We made air cleaners for all the participants. We tested the air cleaners in our labs to make sure they were working, and then we gave them to all the participants who wanted one. And these air cleaners will filter out the particulate matter in their environment and reduce the exposure concentration, and so thereby improving the health of the residents that are using them.
I really enjoyed that study because it really allowed me to say what is exactly happening around me in my neighborhood and not having to rely on another air monitor down the street. And so even on the days that I think it's a perfectly clean environment, there's still the freeway, there's still a slaughterhouse, there's still all these different chemical polluters in the area.
In a place like this, people don't have the privilege to experience one pollution type at a time. There's noise pollution, there's light pollution, land pollution, air pollution, water pollution, from the highway to semi-trucks driving through here to the industry we have here. Like, that sound, like, that's a sound that never stops. And as the night goes on and everything quiets around it, like, that sound gets louder and the beeping gets louder. Their work never stops. But we have to recognize how they're all connected, what impacts they have on a human's body, a human's emotions.
When you have the interstates on two sides of the community, you're getting all the gases from that. And then you get Suncor which is right there in the middle of this highly populated area, which is also releasing a lot of sulfur into the environment, and community activists have been fighting that for years.
Suncor is the only refinery in Colorado. It brings in some of the tar sands from Canada, as well as some of the oil that is produced in Colorado, and refines them into jet fuel and the gasoline that we buy at the pump at our local gas station.
This oil refinery has been here since the 1930s. It has been owned by various owners. Right now, currently, it is owned by a Canadian company. And it's a reality that this community is living and has been living in the shadows of Suncor, and that includes health impacts, the nuisance.
Suncor is a major pollutant. You can see the flame always burning, we have our own version like of an endless flame here.
Here's the highway. Oh, and there's the Suncor flare. That's one of the Suncor flares that are burning all day. Well, what the community says is it burns even taller, and they burn more at night when people aren't watching.
Suncor emits a wide range of pollutants. One of the most concerning is hydrogen cyanide. Suncor is one of the biggest sources of hydrogen cyanide in the state.
Come on, I mean, it's 800,000 tons of cyanide that's being emitted a year in our communities. It's tons and tons of poisons, I call it.
The refinery has been such an ongoing project in a bad way. It feels like every time we make progress, there's a new loophole or the industry spends money. At first, we were talking about air permits. They're flaring and they're constantly violating the law. That hasn't made a difference with their continued operation.
That refinery exceeds its permits, on average, according to recent news reports, every 3 days. Recently, we've seen PFAS spikes that are about 1,000 times higher than the EPA recommendation. And PFAS is, the forever chemicals that once they're in the water, you can't really do anything to mitigate them. They are there forever. And so those are things that we've been working with communities to try to fix.
Suncor is one of the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the state of Colorado. It can cause difficulty in breathing, all kinds of respiratory effects. It also has an impact in low concentrations.
I had pretty bad asthma growing up, but I wanted to overcome that, and so I took up running in DC, and I recognized how my asthma kind of went away when I moved away. And my other respiratory issues that I had all kind of just went away. And I thought maybe I outgrew them, but then moving back to Denver, they came back.
Maybe the first year that you're here, you might start getting the headaches, the bloody noses, which is what happened to us. My kids started with the bloody noses. My daughter had the migraines. I have the migraines. My mom developed vertigo. It became clear to me that it was not my lifestyle or my genetics, because most of every neighbor has some kind of health impact, worse than me.
And so it's clear that there's something going on in this particular community that is causing these high cancer incidences.
So we came together as a community and we said, what can we do? Well, let's run legislation of our own to try to improve air quality. And it started with an Air Toxic Act. The first year, nobody would carry the bill. So what did? We went and knocked doors. We elected leaders from our community to bring air pollution legislation, and we got a piece of it. We got reverse 911 on Suncor of notifications, which I think has empowered the community to understand, one, how to keep themselves safe, and we're more aware now of what's happening at Suncor.
I think this is an extremely important policy tool for communities to be aware of the hazardous substances that they could be potentially exposed to, specifically because many of the pollutants that Suncor emits we know have been tied to things such as cancer, benzene, for example.
Since then, we also passed the Air Toxics Act, the Colorado Air Toxics Act, which will set real health-based limits for toxics. So These permits that we're talking about, they're just a license to pollute. It's about how much you can pollute. It's not about what's tied to science and what protects health. And so over the coming years, we're going to be setting health-based limits for dozens and dozens of toxics, which is a really good thing, but it's going to take time.
There needs to be a lot more work done to hold Suncor accountable, because air pollution is one of the world's biggest environmental health risks. Air pollution is responsible for 7 million premature deaths around the world. And despite all of that, it continues to be a huge problem.
I think right now there are so many other major factors that make this the most polluted zip code in America, but there's nothing as bad as those chemical pollutants, those things that have a massive impact over the greater area and our air quality. Where I thought smell, it directly correlated to toxins in the air, I learned that actually toxins, you can't always smell them. But while you can't really smell Suncor, you can definitely smell Purina.
This is the Purina plant. You know, they employ a lot of people. People live in the community, hundreds of people, but the smell is just awful. And they've said they've installed scrubbers that are supposed to make it better. We smell it all the time. We have this whole hotline that you can call in and make complaints about. And this is a smell that's going like 24 hours a day. I think that's the other part that's really challenging for people who live around here. The air quality, it doesn't sit still. It moves around. It contributes to the haze for every single person. Now, it impacts people here the most, the concentrations of the air pollution are the most, but it is impacting everybody. And I think environmental justice has reached the top of this national conversation because it's impacting real lives. It's cancer, it's strange leukemias, it's double blindness when people are born, it's years lost of life.
I have a lot of friends in the community that have been here since they were children, and they've have higher asthma rates. They have a lot of chronic illnesses that other people that grew up in their neighborhoods don't have. So for my neighbors, they know based on their lived experiences and their chronic illnesses that something isn't right here.
And I've met a number of people from Globeville who were told, don't eat from your garden, because the land itself was carcinogenic from all these processes that had gone on over more than a century.
When I moved back from DC, this was all just like dead and stickers, and we couldn't get anything to grow, so kind of replaced a lot of the soil, done a lot of work to get things to grow here, and we still kind of struggle. I have a raised garden bed there for like food and stuff, because I don't put edible things in the ground because of the contamination. We knew there was contamination in this soil since I was a kid, and I actually believe that's what caused my grandpa's cancer that he died from. This is a good one because you can see in the background like all of his crops. He used to grow corn and everything back there in the ground. He was a green thumb and was always out in the yard without gloves. And he ended up getting cancer, and that's what he died from. And I'm convinced that it's from the soil. When I was in high school, we were learning about what a Superfund site is and what brownfields were, and how we had one of those in Denver, and it happened to be in my neighborhood.
This was a neighborhood where there were these smelter facilities that were processing the ore and minerals that came down from the Rocky Mountains. And the legacy of that was pollution that led to the designation of 3 Superfund sites here in the neighborhoods.
Superfund is actually a classification by the Environmental Protection Agency of disturbed land, so land that's very toxic, and when it gets classified as a Superfund site, it means that you can start to clean it up.
Denver is a wealth of Superfund sites. And the EPA studies showed that, yeah, a lot of the land that people were living on was just toxic.
Those residents, I think to this day, are not supposed to be using that soil for gardening. They can use elevated planter boxes and things like that, but there are still concerns.
There's been mitigation attempts. I know a lot of the soil, toxic soil, there was a project to remove it and replace people's garden soil. But I think there's just so much that's been leached into the ground, into the water in this area. I don't know that you can really render it safe.
And that's part of the legacy of the environmental injustices that have occurred in this neighborhood and that residents continue to be burdened by.
Globeville and Elyria are remarkable in just the amount of toxins that basically became their legacy.
The environmental factors are nothing short but phenomenal in terms of health. And it's a known fact that people who reside in these type of neighborhoods, your lifespan is decreased by 10 years. And that's really unfortunate that your life has to decrease only because of the zip code that you live in or where you reside.
This has always been a polluted neighborhood, from when they had the smelters all the way to now when we have Suncor. You can tell a community, hi, you are in an extremely polluted area, but if there isn't recompense, if there isn't a way to make things better, if there isn't a way for you to improve the quality of your life despite your air, you can educate someone to the end of time and it isn't gonna have a chance to change their lifestyle. So for my neighbors, the idea of education is almost redundant. They know that there's a de-investment in these areas because there's no sidewalks, there's no ample lighting. So our entire street, from the very top to the bottom, we only have this one light for lighting in the evenings, and it's really unfortunate because it's so high up there and so old that we barely really get any lighting. There's a lot of people that always talk about our sidewalks. As you can see, they're old enough that our grass has grown through everything. It's just really inaccessible to someone that's coming down here with a couple wheels or maybe just in a different capacity situation. And I wanted to show you a little bit of my front yard. It's not so much that I'm proud of this, but I wanted to give an example of just the amount of effort that we have to do. So I got this tree from Denver Digs Trees with the parks people, and I had to plant it and water it every single day while it was young, and that is the best that I can do right now. But there's so many of my neighbors that really can't spend that extra time, money, come out in the heat to be able to water their trees. And these neighbors, they're awesome, but they are renters, and so when the landlord was able to install a tree, he didn't necessarily come back to make sure that it was watered, that it was taken care of. It's really important to understand that when these programs come externally and they don't come back to really see the lasting impact, then we're never really gonna have a lasting effort, because it really isn't the job of renters to build a tree canopy in a community that they might not stay in.
When you're a tenant or a renter and the property's not yours, I think people tend to not have a strong ownership or detached to the neighborhood, and the property doesn't belong to them. So I think a lot of them in their mindset, why should I care if I have weeds in the back of my yard? Why should I care if there's trash in the alley? And I think that has a lot to do with it. And the second thing, I think this is really a prevalent factor, is the economic status. And people work 2 and 3 jobs just to be able to pay the rent. I mean, rents down here are $2,000-3,000.
There are these areas that are mostly affected negatively in the economic financial sense. And the percentage of homeowners is lower in those areas, particularly in Globeville, than anywhere in Denver.
The makeup of our neighborhood is changing a little bit more. I think where before we were 75% ownership, I believe we're now 75% renters. Building camaraderie, that's the beauty of opportunities for ownership, is you build long-term relationships, and we've kind of lost that.
But now there's a lot of, for lack of better words, gentrification, or people being displaced, they can't pay their property taxes. The residential profile has recently changed in the last 3 to 4 years.
The big problem with that is that if the area is gentrified and they're kicked out of the area that they know, then to go to any other part of Denver, it's unaffordable. I do know that in the area, the median price is around the 400s versus the Denver area, metro area, which is in the 600s. So you could see a huge difference in home values.
I think that it's become incredibly hard to afford to live in Denver. Taxes are going up. And so even now, these communities are becoming to be gentrified. So you have people paying top dollar to move where it's toxic air pollution and it's not great. They are worried about food access, that's a big one. They want Suncor to be shut down. They want people to act. At some point, there's this community exhaustion, and then there's a belief that it's not going to really result in anything if they do show up. And we have to work against that. We have to be positive. We have to show the success that we have had, the laws that we have been able to pass.
I always get asked, well, if you don't like your neighborhood, well, you should leave. I said, well, that's not my goal. My goal here is to make my neighborhood one of the best neighborhoods in the city.
I want to stay here and continue fighting for my community and what we deserve, because if I don't, you know, who else will?
I believe that success for my neighborhood looks like being heard the same way any other neighborhood would. We don't have green spaces, we don't have sidewalks, we don't have lighting. So success would have to mean having the same ear, the same attention that other communities do.
I hope that people see that we've won real protections. We have passed major legislation around lead pipes, funding for the work, disclosing what's in fracking, regulating air quality. And so we need more people to be involved, because it's not just enough to win it, you have to stay involved to make sure it's implemented.
What I hope in 10 years is to be able to come out here and just hear the birds and nothing else. Like, hear the birds and hear my neighbors and hear the kids playing in the neighborhood. What about people here who never get an opportunity to rest, to sleep, to experience silence? And so I'd like to see that change, and I think that if we don't learn how to do that, we'll never hold polluters accountable, and we'll always have these expendable communities or sacrificed communities like mine.
Knowing the history of what these neighbors have had to go through, it's imperative that we swing the pendulum the other way. Otherwise, we will lose this community, the amazing history that comes with it, and the people that are here. And that would just change the makeup of Denver forever.
We're turning the page after 100 years of oppression from the industries in these communities. But I believe that we can envision what it looks like 7 generations from now, and we can have clean skies. We can have clean drinking water. People can cross the street safely, and they can have a grocery store in their neighborhood. These are real, tangible things we know we can do because we have the solutions. It's about the full remediation. And what I would love is for health disparities to disappear, and I would love for the wealth of this community to increase, and I would love for it to be the nicest community to ride a bike under shady trees.
I think the solutions are not easy ones. I think it requires all of us as Denverites to start caring about these communities, because there was always this neglect from the city at large. So yeah, it's really a tragedy from the very beginning, and it's amazing the resilience that the people in these communities have shown over a century.
Yeah, there's my sunshine. He's such a good boy. I think learning that this was the most polluted zip code in America was a little surprising, even though I had physically experienced the negative health outcomes, but also it was a piece of information that made me more determined than ever to fight for justice in this community. The first day I got him home, we sat right here. Being a first-time mom, there's this tension at play. One, I know I'm in the most polluted zip code in America, and to some degree there's guilt for being here, exposing myself, and then also the generational ties I have to this community, like being able to sit over there on my rocking chair and watch the sunset, and knowing that my grandparents sat here, watched this same sunset, watched their kids play in the same place. Like, that's important too. It's important to have like that connection to the land and to community, and to like walk on the same ground that my great grandma walked on with my babies. Look at them, look at this. This will always be home base. And for me, that's particularly important as someone who's grown up in poverty, as someone who is Indigenous, to always have a piece of land that we call home, that we have control over, even if it is in the most polluted zip code in America, this will always be a piece of land my descendants will have the ability to lay claim to.